So I'm gonna make sour bread dough. Now, this is my starter that I just got out of the refrigerator. I started this 2 days ago and I wasn't ready to make bread yet. So I put it in this container and put it back in the refrigerator. Now, you can see on the handle, I don't have it all the way closed. Normally it goes down, but I knew it could possibly rise a little bit more and I didn't want the jar to explode. So I did not close it. So as you can see, it's very, very full and it has nice bubbles in it. So this is a good starter. This is a good, healthy starter. It's been in the refrigerator, like I said, for 2 days. When I did make the starter originally, I did use the 60, the recipe that starts with 60 grams. So what I'm gonna do is when you first make sourdough bread, you need to make sure you have all your tools out. I have my starter, I have my scale, and it should be one, all scales you'll be able to zero out, and you'll hear me saying that I wanna zero it out. I have a big bowl, and I know this bowl is large enough for a 2-loaf recipe for sourdough bread. What?
It's 4 quarts.
It's 4 quarts, this bowl? Okay. It's a 4-quart bowl. My husband's videotaping and he knows this stuff. I wasn't sure. So I have my bowl, my scale, my starter, my 2 favorite tools, a spoon and a fork. I like a long handle spoon and I need a fork for when my dough gets a little more firm. I have my water, my warm water. Now this water can be anywhere from 100 degrees to 109. Don't go over 109. I poured this out a little while ago. So right now it's at 106. So that'll go down a little bit by the time I get to mixing. And I also have this is the bread flour I use, the unbleached oxidant flour, unbleached oxidant. It's just as good as bread flour, but I prefer this over all-purpose or general bread flour. So now we're gonna make our starter, our sourdough. So I'm gonna turn this on, put my bowl on, and right now it says 1579 grams. If I press the on button again, it zeroes out my scale to 0. So I'm gonna take my starter and I'm gonna pour in, you know what, I forgot one of my own recommendations here. I forgot my recipe. Get your recipe out. Even though I use this recipe every week, I still like to have it. It's just me. So I'm gonna use the one for 2 loaves of bread. So I need 250 grams of starter. And since it's light and fluffy, it looks like more than it really is. I need 250 grams. I'm measuring that out. 221. This isn't exact science. It's way more exact using a scale than it is measuring actual dough. I mean, actually by the cups or anything like that. Now, right now I have 256 grams, so I'm gonna take a little bit out and just get it down to close to 250. I'm at 251, that's perfect. Okay, now I have the starter in. I'm gonna zero out my scale and I'm gonna add the water. My recipe calls for 725 grams of warm water. So I'm gonna add 725 grams. And this is a quart container. I don't use a measuring cup. Why bother? Because you're just measuring in grams. I need 725. I'm exactly at 725. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir this starter, which is like a big ball right now. Oh, I forgot the salt. So it's still going to be lumpy when you make your sourdough bread. When you make your starter, it's actually going to dissolve pretty well. But when I make my bread, it's a little lumpy, so I have to stir it a bit to get it mixed up. It doesn't have to be perfectly mixed. It does not have to be perfect. Just, you can see it's mixed in there pretty good. I still have some chunks. You can see I still have some chunks in there. Now, a lot of people might be like, oh, that's not good enough. I don't like all those chunks. It's okay. So I just use the same quart container to keep my dirty spoon. Now I'm gonna zero out my scale and I'm gonna add 25 grams of salt. I use this kosher salt. Nope, it's pure sea salt, of course, pure sea salt, but I've used Himalayan salt. I've used, oh gosh, what else? I've used any kind of salt, but I like the healthier ones like sea salt or Himalayan salt. Those are my favorites. We got 25 grams of salt in there. Stir it up just a little bit. And now for the bread flour or high oxidant flour, which is what I use. You know what, when I zeroed that out, I noticed it was a little light on the salt. So, again, this is just my quick sourdough method. It's probably not what you see on Facebook. Make sure my scale is zeroed. Now I have 1,000 grams of flour to add. Add that right in there while it's on the scale. It's okay if you don't get it exact right away. And I went a little bit over. It's 1,010 grams. I like to be a little closer than that, so I just grab some out of it. I'm at 1,004. That's 1,000 on the nose. There we go. So there's my flour. I'm gonna put that away later. And as you can see, this starter that was full to the top is now half empty. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put that right back in my refrigerator for next week. And this is when I start to use my fork. We don't need the scale anymore, so just because this is a pretty large bowl, I'm gonna turn off my scale and stir my sourdough mix and flour and salt with my fork. And I don't know what my time is like here. 7 minutes. So you can see this process doesn't take long, and it would have taken a few more seconds shorter if I would have remembered my recipe and my salt. It's always best to get out the recipe first, get the recipe out first, and then look at your ingredients, make sure you have all your tools. Then you don't have to do what I do or what I did this time and stop and go get something that I've missed. Now, I don't know if you can like get a little closer to this dough, Mark. This is a very ragged dough, but this is what your dough should look like when you're mixing it. So it looks pretty good. Got all the flour off the bottom and off the sides. It's not gonna be even Steven. It's not gonna be perfect. So one of the things that I do wanna mention is you have to be a little bit careful with cleanup with the sourdough starter and mix. It turns into like cement. So I'm gonna leave this dough. Oh, I see a little spot here where it's a little bit liquidy. I'm gonna mix that in. It's a little raggedy, you can see, but not nearly a loaf of bread yet. Okay, I'm gonna cover this with my tea towel, and then I'm gonna put it on the stove for 30 minutes. Now, for the next 2 hours, so right now it's 5:30, until 7:30, every half hour, I'm gonna go in and do my stretch and folds, and we're gonna stop taping now, and we'll come back when I'm doing my stretch. Okay, I lost my helper, so I'm going to show you the first set of stretch and folds. So as you can see, the dough is still pretty ragged. I'm not sure if you can see that. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna make my fingers wet. That keeps the dough from sticking. Pull one side up, pat it down. So stretch and fold. Turn the bowl quarter of a turn, stretch, it's sticky, and fold. it sticks to your fingers, so I just tap it off. Pull next quarter, stretch, and fold. I feel like I'm doing yoga. And I've never done yoga, but I really want to try it. Stretch and fold. You only need to do this like probably twice during this turn. As you can see, it's really sticking to my fingers. I just keep this little quart container here to rinse off my fingers a little bit and then use a towel, but that's only because I'm videotaping. If I wasn't videotaping, I'd be over at the sink washing my hands like a fiend because I don't like this sticky on my fingers, but it'll get better. Cover it up, put it on the stove, and wait 30 minutes for your next set of stretching. What? Okay, we're on our last set of stretch and folds. The dough is a lot more smooth. And so I'm gonna wet my fingers and start with this corner. And you can see the dough is much more pliable at this point. Stretch and fold, stretch and fold, stretch and fold. You do all four corners. All four corners are stretched and folded. Now all we have to do is cover, put in a warm, dark place overnight. Like yesterday, before we went to bed, you remember we were done with our stretch and folds at 7:30. So overnight, before I went to bed, I put my oven on warm 170, heated it up, turned it off. Then I put my loaf in because it's winter and it's cold and it takes a bit longer to rise in the winter. So you can see it rose pretty well. You can also see that the crust is a little bit hard. This is what you want. This is exactly what you want. It doubled in size. It's a nice, big, healthy sourdough. Now this is a 2-loaf recipe, so I'm gonna dump it right here on my board. Now it sticks. And some people might have other ways to do this, but I just use my fingers and pull it off the bowl. You gotta kind of pay attention to both ends because it would be very easy for this to go off the cutting board, and trust me, I've done it many, many, many times. But if you keep pulling the bowl away from the dough and just wiggling it here, scratching it out with your fingers, you get a nice, now you can see I went off the edge. So that's why you have these tools like a dough scraper. I have plenty of, oh, it's very sticky, which is fine. That's why we put flour on our board. And I didn't get quite enough flour over on this edge. So it's a little bit sticky, but no worries. That's what you use your dough scraper for. So make sure and get all that dough up if you can, because like I said before, it really hardens. I mean, you're gonna wash your cutting board, but once it gets on your cutting board, if you let it dry, it gets really hard. Okay, so now I'm gonna shape this guy very loosely. Shape him. Get a little more flour over here on the sticky part. A little more flour. Now this is not an exact science, but you can work at this and make it an exact science if you want to. I'm just baking this for us, not for professional. So I have it about, I take my dough scraper, I cut it in half. It's not gonna, like I said, it's not gonna be exact. Cut it in half. Now just the way this recipe worked out, this one seems like a little bit more of an oblong, which works out perfectly because I have 2 different shaped pots, 2 different shaped Dutch ovens. Dutch ovens are perfect for this. In fact, I've tried it in other things and Dutch ovens just work better. So some people will let your dough rest for an hour. I personally don't. I've already heated up the oven. The oven's preheated to 450. I just got the pots out of the oven. Erase my fingers. just got my pots out of the oven so they're nice and warm. And this is my round pot. Before I put it in the oven, I had already prepared parchment paper and I put cornmeal on it. Pre-cut it, put the cornmeal on it, put it back in the preheated Dutch oven, put my loaf in, then I cut it, put some slices in the top. Some people get really crazy about it. A real deep slice on one side will create that like kind of Elvis haircut look. I just make a few cuts in it. Then I'm gonna put the lid back on. And in the oven it will go. I'll do the same thing with the other loaf. So this is how they came out. You have one smaller loaf and one larger loaf. And Mark and I are gonna switch and he's gonna show you his special way to cut it. Okay. He's a genius at this.
I always put it upside down. And you can cut it real good. And our dogs love it.
What about you?
Oh, I like it too. And our dogs. They have to get treats. Good. That's it.